I just wanted to make sure that we could clarify before we get started, in case anybody is here specifically for Oak Watch. This meeting this evening does not include Oak Watch. Made a couple changes to how the Oak Watch meetings are going to be conducted, and starting next month, Oak Watch meetings are going to be quarterly rather than monthly, but anyone who is interested in receiving monthly updates from Oak Watch, we are going to be restarting our monthly newsletter for Oak Watch, and we are inviting, asking, beseeching, encouraging you at any time to drop us an email at questions@opdc.org. Excuse me, questions@opdc.org. If you ever have a code enforcement issue that you'd like us to investigate, or information or questions about how to report things, we are very, very happy to be of service. So please stay tuned for slightly better communication than what I'm offering right now about how Oak Watch is going to look in the future. And please do plan to join us for the Oak Watch meeting next month at 7 p.m. on March 16th. So just putting that placeholder, and I think we'll have more details after the meeting. But welcome everybody to Let's Talk. And we are very fortunate this evening, next slide, to have with us Derek Dauphin, who is the lead planner for the Oakland Neighborhood Plan, among his many other responsibilities and areas of expertise. He has been shepherding a large group of extremely recalcitrant people through 2.5 years worth of thinking and pondering and analyzing in the Oakland neighborhood. And this evening is going to share with you some of the draft programs and projects that are under consideration at the moment in the draft plan. Did I say that right, Derek? Do you think that was a fair?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thank you.
Very good. So I am going to, Derek's going to do some slides at the moment to sort of show some things, but the hope here is that at any time, if anybody has questions, since it's slides, it's a little bit maybe difficult to manage. If you're able to raise your hand, I will keep an eye on the participant list. If you're able to put something in the chat, I will happily pull questions out of the chat, or if you'd like to just unmute yourself and say, excuse me, I have a question, we are happy to entertain those and would love to hear your input as we go forward. So take it away, Derek.
All right, thank you. It still says that host disabled participant screen sharing. Try now. There we go. That worked. Thank you. All right. And just remind me, when I have it like this, can you see the box on the right-hand side where you all are? Or can you see the full slide right now?
You can move that box around.
Okay.
We see this. We see the full slide.
Okay. All right. Maybe that helps. This way, at least I can see someone, which is always, once you're just staring at your own slide, it's like you could be in a room by yourself. So yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Derek Dauphin. I can see from who's here that many of you know me, but I've been the neighborhood planner for Oakland for a little over 5 years now, and the project manager for the Oakland Plan for a little over 2.5 years now. So we're getting towards the end here, and we wanted to be able to sort of give you a preview of what's in the plan. Many of you have had many previews, so this is a pretty expert group on what's in the plan, but I wanted to highlight some projects and programs. And in sort of working through the agenda with Andrea before the meeting, we also thought some of the elements of the zoning that maybe are less top of mind for residents would be good to sort of bring forward and discuss a little bit, particularly around what we're proposing for 5th and Forbes. So we've got some in there about the sort of proposals there too. For folks that haven't been with us the whole time, we know there are, a fair number. The Oakland Plan process started really in the summer of 2019. And you can see the full timeline here, and you don't need me to read it to you, and we'll give you the slides that you can look at after the fact. So, but as you can sort of see on here, there's a number of different ways that people engage with the process. This slide probably does a little better job of explaining those if you're not familiar with them, but the steering committee, which Andrea and a number of the folks on the call serve on, is 30 people that represent 30 different organizations or groups. And then they've been meeting every month for those 2.5 years. We may have missed 1 or 2 months during that entire time, but we didn't miss a month because the pandemic went straight to Zoom. So I applaud them for sticking with us for that long period of time and really being great collaborators in this process. There is all the rest of the people who weren't part of that. And so we sort of look at them as the broader community. And in Oakland, that is a very broad group. So it includes a lot of different people, and they all sort of are engaged differently and need to be engaged differently. Then there's people who really wanted to dig into certain topics. Those are the action teams. So we had them around each chapter of the plan, and they helped to develop the strategies that are in the plan, some of which we'll look at today. And then there were some things that were beyond their technical capacity or needed more sort of a detailed dive. And so we created these sort of technical advisory groups and focus groups to do that. And then I am one person, but there's actually about 10 staff members that work on this project. And so I'm presenting other people's work here. Full disclosure, I did not create all of this stuff myself. There are lots of people working on this project, lots of resources that are committed to this project. So, this is sort of the by the numbers engagement summary. We were planning during the pandemic, so a lot of our work was through Zoom, and we created a whole engagement platform initially to serve this project and the comprehensive plan. And it's now grown, and it's great to see everyone using it across the city and with partners. But that's sort of how we've been able to sort of continue to plan through the pandemic, which has been great. And I think many people have been able to participate that maybe wouldn't have been able to participate in evening meetings during the weekdays. But we have had some in-person events, and particularly in the fall, we had that sort of brief window where we were all outside being normal people for a little while. And so we were out there at maybe a dozen different events, talking to people and showing people what had come out of the planning process so far. We are not planning in a vacuum. Oakland has lots of plans. Oakland has plans that are going on right now, and some of you on the call are part of those plans. So we recognize that there are existing plans like the Oakland 2025 plan. Early on in our process, the Business Improvement District was creating a really visionary strategic plan. There are master plans that are happening at the institutions, many of them still ongoing right now. So this planning process has learned from those and has also influenced those at the same time. There are sort of some big themes that have come out of this, recognizing that we sort of have to grow housing and job opportunities at the same time in Oakland. That livability is a real concern for a lot of people. Pretty much anyone that lives in Oakland struggles with some of the issues that the neighborhood faces. But the mobility systems really do need to be rethought and carefully changed so that it prioritizes pedestrians, transit riders, cyclists, people who walk and roll the streets. And then we heard sort of loud and clear through this planning process, particularly from Black residents, from students, and from immigrants and newcomers, that historically their needs have not been addressed, and that we need to do better moving forward. And so you'll see that sort of throughout the plan as us thinking sort of intentionally about what that means and how do we go forward differently than we've been in the past. The plan format, when you see it, will have a vision statement, one vision statement. It's on the website right now in a very long form. We've got a lot of comments about shortening it. So we're going to try to shorten that, but we want everyone to be in there, so it's a little hard. Then there'll be a smaller number of goals around each chapter, and you can see the chapters on the right here, and these are the buttons from our webpage, so you probably have seen those before. And then within each of those chapters, there's going to be policies, projects, and programs. We don't have any partnerships. We realize that most of those ended up as programs, so we'll have mostly projects and programs. But that's the gist of what the plan will look like. It'll be an online format plan, so we'll probably stray a little bit away from having everything in these big tables that the steering committee has had to wrestle with for the last couple of months, just so that it's a little easier format to provide online, and then to also get feedback on online. But that's what the table looks like in the neighborhood plan guide, and sort of that's the information that we're collecting and we'll have in the plan. And then for a lot of the strategies, we have a lot more detail that can fit in a table. So we'll have these sort of 1 to 3 page documents that basically become the scope for that project. And so once the plan's adopted, then the people who sort of committed to leading those projects will have these to sort of take forward and start doing things, which is the goal, right, is to do these things in the plan. So today I'm going to highlight a couple things that you'll see in the plan. As I noted, 5th and Forbes Avenues, We have a lot of focus on creating more open spaces as part of sort of the livability component of the plan. So I'll talk about those. Community service hubs, and I'm going to give you mostly a preview on the mobility. There's a lot of mobility work that's happened as a part of this planning process. I'm going to just flash stuff on the screen for you, just to really pique your interest in coming back next month for when the mobility team will be here to go into the details with you, because they've done great work. There's a lot there. So let's start with Fifth and Forbes. Andrew was saying people might not know what we're actually doing there, and I can totally understand that. So one of the things that we're doing there is applying something that we've been applying in a lot of different places that we've been doing planning and rezonings, which is something called the performance point system, which is a height bonus system. And basically buildings can earn more height by doing things that communities say they want in their plans. So this was first created when we created the first neighborhood plan in Uptown, the Eco-Innovation District plan. And then in the planning process, we've been looking at providing more height for things like buildings that are very energy efficient or sustainable, that generate their own power, maybe through solar panels and other renewables, that create large public art installations and other activities. And then something new for Oakland, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, is capturing some value from these projects to further equitable development goals. There's also, we've heard from so many people about the way that development has sort of let them down in recent decades. And there's been some great development, and there's been some that people feel like has been creating sort of a canyon effect on Fifth and Forbes. There's just generally a desire to create more space, a better public realm, we call it, sort of where the buildings meet the road, for pedestrians, for outdoor activities, for lots of reasons. And so we're looking at bigger sidewalks. We're also looking at requiring open spaces. We do this downtown. And so looking at requiring new development to bring open spaces to the neighborhood. Parts of the neighborhood have tons of open space, but people usually, they tend to be in areas where people don't live. So we want to sort of bring open space to the whole neighborhood. One thing that I want to call out here is that, and I'm going to get into the weeds of why, but we are talking about really focusing in on employment for the Fifth and Forbes corridor. Currently, it's you can do almost anything there. And so what we're seeing a lot of is student housing. And certainly we've heard loud and clear that people want there to be student housing built, that there is a huge demand for student housing, it needs to be addressed, and that the demand for student housing is having all sorts of other impacts on the other parts of the housing market. But the employment district is unique, and we think it's unique actually in the state. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about why we would not want the housing necessarily to happen there, or not a lot of it to happen there. We are already, even though we're just sort of at early stages of getting this out there, we're already starting to get questions about, could we do a little bit maybe? Or could we have it be affordable housing? So we're taking that input in as we go through the next phases of the plan, release the plan and do more community outreach. So one of the reasons that we see this as being important is that our data shows, and the Brookings Institute report before us showed the same thing, which is that Oakland, compared to other similar innovation neighborhoods where we're creating the same kinds of jobs, actually creates fewer of them for people that don't have a bachelor's degree or higher. So that's a lot of our population, right? So we are not necessarily creating as many jobs as other similar districts for people that we need to create jobs for in this city. And so there's a lot of data in this. This is from our existing conditions report. People often say, like, where's the data? This is where the data is. And so you can go look at that. It's a very large document, but I do recommend people take a look at that. It even has sort of things to think about throughout the document, which we did use in the planning process. But you'll see, comparing us to almost every other major innovation district, we actually have the most educated employees. And that speaks to the fact that we're not hiring people who don't have high levels of education. It might sound great to say that, but it actually means that we're not employing a lot of people that don't have those that level of educational attainment. Life sciences is a big deal in Oakland and in the city, and it's rapidly growing, and the pandemic has really sped that up. Those are all potentially huge benefits to Oakland and to the city. Those kinds of jobs, and we looked at this with our consultants, are the kinds of jobs that actually provide better access to careers and to better paying careers. So you can see here on the right that when you look at the number of jobs that are created, a full 33% of them only need a high school education. 10% of them need associate's degrees. And in our steering committee, we've heard again and again from a lot of the folks that work in these professions that they have a huge demand for these a lot of these jobs and a huge demand for people to fill them. And so This is a growing part of what Oakland is, and a great opportunity if we can connect it up with people who need those opportunities and create more of those opportunities. These buildings don't fit very easily into Oakland. So a lot of times where you see these buildings is they have big footprints, and Oakland has relatively small historic blocks. And they need to be taller if they're not gonna grow outward, and they can't really grow outward because of our street grid. They sort of have to be able to grow upward. And so the heights that we're looking at, or what we've studied, is that they have taller floor heights, so they are inherently taller buildings. The same number of floors for a residential building would be a much shorter building, so height matters here. Here's that floor plate sort of explanation, and this is a big flat building, right? Sort of short and fat, but that doesn't really fit into Oakland very well. So we did a whole workshop on this last May, and we're looking at, okay, how do you fit these buildings that create these great jobs into Oakland? It's not easy. And so we had consultants that worked in all these other innovation districts looking at this and trying to figure out how that works. And what they came up with was it's possible through taller buildings that then have these sort of pedestrian bridges that connect across. So you basically are creating a footprint across over a street or an alley. And so that is one of the things that we're sort of looking at allowing, is this kind of building to happen. With that, you can get things like these public plazas and these sort of bigger sidewalks that we've been talking about and that we know that people really are interested in. I would say that was the major interest when we showed things like this at the workshops, is that was a highly desirable outcome. So there's a lot in there. I'm not going to tell you all, this is another teaser, but if you go into that report, you can see the link at the bottom of this page here. You can see we modeled out all sorts of different height scenarios, all sorts of how do you manage parking on the site. We used a site where there's a parking authority garage. So that helped us to really look at that. You know, how do you meet all these different demands on one site? And so I do recommend people go take a look at that, because there's a lot of data supporting some of these ideas. To return back to what else can these buildings do for Oakland and really for the city, one of the things that we think we can create and create benefit around is that these buildings can earn their height through specific ways, and we have this bonus system elsewhere. It doesn't have a bonus around the kinds of jobs that are created. And so what we've been talking about in the planning process and are looking at right now is that we can create a way to earn height that does focus on the jobs that are created or investing in different kinds of jobs. And so we're thinking about it as there's going to be all sorts of different projects with all sorts of different tenants in them. So we got to be very flexible about how this works, but maybe 3 different ways to satisfy this. If the goal is to create more jobs for and more upward mobility for our residents, then we can look at it as hiring practices. So are the employers in these buildings, are they able to commit to a certain amount of jobs for people that don't have bachelor's degrees, that come from low income neighborhoods, that kind of thing. If they can't do that, can they tenant an organization that runs career programming and services that help people to get into these jobs? And if they can't do that, then we have alternative compliance throughout our zoning code. It's a totally normal thing to have in there. Then they could then pay into a city trust fund, and we have lots of city trust funds. We'll talk about that in a sec. And then we could use that money in the city trust fund and work in collaboration with the community to direct those funds to those kinds of programming and those opportunities to create them. So that's what we're looking at right now. We're still getting a lot of help on that one because it's a relatively new thing. It's certainly new for Pittsburgh. The trust fund itself, just, this is a little wonky, but we have a lot of trust funds. They usually have a set of policies that sort of flexibly determine how the money can be spent and make sure that it's not spent on the wrong things. As I noted, most of the trust funds that we have from development are around when the goals or the standards can't be met on site. So you have tree canopy and stormwater and open space, for example. The other thing is that the expenditures would be from the fund would go through the city. So I think that's important to note. So what we've been conceiving of is some of those other funds have commissions and other kinds of ways to spend the money. What we're thinking about here is that the money that goes into the fund from Oakland would then be, that DCP, City Planning, Department of City Planning, would work with a community board to make decisions about how those funds are spent. And that could take a lot of different forms, and we don't have to have all the details right now, but one idea that we've been talking about is that maybe we could collaborate with this committee to identify like a request for proposals, maybe on an annual basis, and then we could identify what the needs are of that year, and then release this request for proposals and have people submit proposals. So it'd be a fair way to get the funds. It would be a transparent way for people to apply to receive the funds. And it would be, you know, the whole point would be to have it be advised by the community itself. It could be more open-ended than that. That's just one way to sort of think about how could this actually function. So it would be staff working with this community board. It could be every year. It could be once there's a certain dollar value. Maybe we all agree that we actually need $2 million and it's going to take a while to get that. So we'll wait until we get that amount of money. All things to be figured out. They don't really have to be figured out at this stage, but we are thinking about those things right now. Ultimately, like all of our city expenditures, city council would approve the spending of the money. I'm going to pause there because that's the first sort of, I went through a bunch of stuff there around what's going on Fifth Avenue, how do we capture value from projects, and then how do we spend that money that's captured. I can see two things in the chat already. Let me see if I can view it.
Sorry, I can help out there. One of them is a question from Millie saying, how are more jobs going to get me good permanent neighbors not living in some transitional housing that we have recently seen proposed? And the other thing that is here is a link from Guy Giampolo to everybody to let you know that the mayor's office announced today that they are withdrawing the support for the Oakland shuttle project, which is not directly related to what it is that you had said, but is a teaser for next month's mobility conversation.
No, yeah, certainly, and big news. So Millie, it's part of the solution. We also, I'm only touching on a very small number of things, and you've got the chance to hear about more of them. We have a whole housing side of this proposal too. The plan has lots of housing elements that maybe get at that a little better. But certainly having more jobs in the neighborhood, and then also creating more housing and trying to create more housing options in the neighborhood does hopefully result in an Oakland where more people get to live and work in Oakland, which gets you more of those permanent long-term residents and neighbors that you want.
Does anyone else have any questions? There's more, so.
Okay.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
If the developers gain extra height by having jobs for people with less than a college education, how is that enforced going forward? You know, how does that become a continual thing?
We're trying to figure that out. So, and that is the most challenging of the options for us to enforce. You know, obviously, there's lots of examples out there of different ways that can be done. The city could certify on an annual basis or a biannual basis. And so we would sort of continually have them submit reports, and we would check those to make sure that they're still meeting that. The period of time that they meet it is also an important thing. Is it 10 years? Is it 100 years? You know, so we're going to have to sort of figure that out in the next couple of weeks, to be honest, to have a little bit more understanding of that. I don't know that we have the answers to that right now, on this day, but we are working on figuring those things out.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to keep moving, but you can always unmute and ask me questions. So, you know, this is sort of helpful. I hadn't thought about it framing it this way, but when we were asking questions about what new development could do for Oakland, starting in the summer of 2020 with our first online open house, the three top priorities were affordable housing, access to jobs, and open space and livability. And so I wanted to talk about open space and livability. So as we noted earlier, Oakland is often known throughout the region for its open spaces, its parks, its regional parks, but a lot of residents still live very close to those. And so where people live, there's often not a lot of open space, unfortunately. And so we're looking at how do we create more open spaces throughout the neighborhood. And as I noted, that there's another part of the city downtown where there are open space requirements. So new, larger scale development does build those. Just build open spaces. There's lessons to be learned from that, from how that went, you know, how that was created and what the results were. But there's also some really, you know, good examples that come out of that as well. So there's public parks, and we heard that we need to improve those and create more function around them. Zulima Park is one that we toured as a part of one of our workshops, and everyone commented on the fact that it doesn't have a lot of function to it today. It's maybe good for walking dogs, but even then it's maybe not ideal for walking dogs. So Looking at the open spaces that we have and adding more function, there was a lot of conversation about Dan Moreno Field and how can it be improved. So the few sort of city parks that we have, there was discussion around those. In general, those functions, as we sort of have heard them, and I'm sure we'll hear more as we go into the next phase of adopting the plan, is community gardens. There's been a big focus on food, and there are community gardens in the neighborhood and that people use. So I think that's part of why that's been sort of top of mind for people. Playgrounds, there are not a lot of playgrounds in the neighborhood. They tend to be there's playgrounds in South Oakland and there's playgrounds in West Oakland. There's not much in the way of playgrounds in Central Oakland. And so they're not sort of everywhere. And the other thing about playgrounds is they have to really be quite close for people to actually go and use them. If they're a 20 or 30-minute walk away, they tend not to be viewed by people as truly serving their immediate area. And topography matters, right? As a parent who pushes strollers, topography matters a lot in terms of whether a playground is accessible. Dog walk areas is always very popular, and we heard about that quite a bit. And then I think another thing that we heard about in many different contexts is that a lot of the long-term residents on the call will see themselves in this, but you want more of a sense of community. You want places to come together. You want places that you can come together, and that's a unique function that open space can serve if it's properly designed. So we took all that stuff in, and we were thinking about different ways to achieve those ends. One of those places where we can create open space, and this is sort of coming back to that Fifth and Forbes example, is on these major corridors. So this is one of the things we looked at is that development site. This is the Parkville building that Pitt owns, and on the side there's another Pitt building, and then this is where the Parking Authority garage is. And so by requiring open spaces, we can create sort of plaza-like spaces. Even the sort of 20-foot setbacks does create some, a sense of park-like environment here, where you've got trees on both sides of the sidewalk. So that does create sort of an open space. It might be a traditional park or even a plaza, but it does create a sense of, some place for people to gather and be. Even without creating a plaza, having 20-foot sidewalks on both sides of the street just changes that character of that street quite a bit, right? So there's lots of places for people to be together, and for a lot of activity. I want to pause because it looks like there might be two things in the chat. Okay. So the first comment looks like from Elena: the city doesn't have a good track record on enforcing anything that affects Oakland. And there's a bunch of different programs. What would the longevity of the extra height for jobs not requiring a college degree be? So I guess that's the question of how long would you require them to create those jobs in the buildings? And we have to figure that out. Okay, and then just a response. Let me keep moving. So these open spaces, because they're 10% of a site, they're not going to be massive city parks, but they could be meaningful, smaller park spaces. So we looked at a couple different projects recently and what kind of open spaces they would create. And Skyview, for example, if there had been an open space requirement that we're talking about here, which is on a 20,000 square foot site or larger, it would be 10% of the site, which is the same standards downtown. That would give you something about 2/3 the size of the Oak Cliff Community Playground in South Oakland. So they're not insignificant spaces. They would have to be sort of a smaller number of functions, but they would allow you to have open space function throughout the neighborhood, which is one of the main goals that we were trying to achieve here. These are examples from different cities, Philadelphia, New York, lots of different cities here that try to get at some of those things, try to highlight both those. So sort of the scale, but also the function. You can see community gardens in here with planters. You can see places to sit and talk where they're seating across from each other, playgrounds, things like that. We also are looking, as I noted earlier on, that we could provide some bonus height for creating some substantial public art investments in the neighborhood. There's been a major focus in the planning discussion around how can we create more investments or try to capture more investment around arts and culture in Oakland. It serves sort of everyone's collective needs, whether you're an employee or a resident. And so we put together some examples of how what those kind of projects look like where a project would could earn height by making a substantial investment in different kinds of public art. The other thing I noted is that we looked at Zulema Park as a part of a workshop that looked at the whole area around there and redevelopment around the area. We often end up talking about the redevelopment around the area, and we don't spend as much time looking at the park, which, as you can see, we're looking at different concepts for creating sort of specialized functional spaces, including, you can see sort of this gathering area here where you could have events and have some elevated seating and things like that. The other thing that maybe gets missed in this is you also have sort of plaza spaces here where you have outdoor seating, and then it's connected to a transit stop here. So this is sort of a transit-oriented park. It also then connects across the boulevard here to a pedestrian sort of path here that connects into the neighborhood. So just want to highlight, that's an investment in a public park, a public investment in a public park. Is this dissimilar from what's been discussed before? Possibly not. So, there's some continuity here. This is the Oakland 2025 plan, which is about 10 years old now. And you can see, again, a similar kind of investment in Zulema Park and development happening around that park. Maybe different concepts around the transportation part of this. But again, I don't think that we're a million miles off of what's been discussed in the past. It's just taking a little bit of a different form. I'm going to pause there and see what the chat is saying here, because I could see the chat. Okay, it's just sort of people chatting with each other. Any questions about any of the open space things that I've shown here? Again, we're trying to move through a sort of a smattering of things that are in the plan. But we have, we're making pretty good time. Any questions about these proposals or how we see them playing out? And sort of cycle back through some of these pages that have lots of pictures on them.
We can move on. If you
Okay.
have questions, please feel free at any time.
Okay. So one of the ideas that came out of the planning process, that's sort of an exciting new approach, is the idea of community service hubs. So are they community centers? Sort of, yeah. They do concentrate a lot of different things in those community centers. There's sort of examples. There's an example from London that I got to see in person, which is really cool, where there was sort of a childcare center on a park, and it had other community services coming out of it, and that connection between the park space and the community center was really important. Then you have one in a rendering of one in the bottom there in Morningside that the Urban Redevelopment Authority was involved with. It's a part of a redevelopment project. So those are what those examples are. What we heard in the planning process is that these could be great places to concentrate a lot of different community services. Career services obviously is a major one that we're talking about, and bringing them into the community. These could be, I'm going to talk about potential locations, but these would be right in close to where people live. So it would sort of reduce some of those barriers to traveling to some other locations to get those services, which I know is really important to this. We have had a lot of interest from the University of Pittsburgh in particular, but I think all the universities and being able to bring programming directly into the neighborhood and provide more service. I know one of the questions that we had in the planning process is, where is the community engagement center for Oakland? Because Pitt has these throughout the city, and I remember that being a question, and I think Pitt is thinking about that actually, and how they start to bring those kinds of services out of the campus and more into Oakland is a big neighborhood, right? So even though Oakland is a neighborhood that has these universities in it, and if you're in South Oakland, you can be pretty far from a lot of those places. One of the things that came out of our infrastructure action team was that there's a big need for resources around how to improve houses and make them more energy efficient, how to generally handle stormwater and make your homes more sustainable and respond to climate change. We're starting to feel the effects of climate change already. I think that it's becoming more important to people to have resources and knowledge about what to do about that. And so that's one of the things that we've been looking at that might be city provided training and resources that could be provided to residents in those places. This is not particularly groundbreaking for us, but providing free Wi-Fi in these places is really important, particularly if people don't have them in their homes. We have been, if you look at the city's activities over the last 5 to 10 years, it's something we've been trying to do more and more at various different community centers already. There's parks that have free Wi-Fi already, so that's not particularly revolutionary there. But we're also seeing it as potentially a part of starting up businesses. So if you have an idea around a business and maybe limited resources, that you could come to these centers, there'd be space for you to be able to sort of set up, a computer or get on a computer and begin to sort of develop your business. One of the things that's important for all of this is if you have kids, you shouldn't be shut out of these programs and services. And so we're looking at the role that childcare services could play in this and after school programs. So it's not just pre-K, but we're really looking at like, how do we support families in Oakland and make sure that having a kid doesn't preclude you from entering the workforce. COVID has obviously knocked everything through a loop on that and made it that much harder for people, particularly women, to stay in the workforce. And so that's probably more important now than it ever has been, really. But something that came out in a number of the conversations that we're looking at. And then something that's more consistent with what we've done in the past is really, where these buildings are adjacent to parks, is to really sort of link up the activities in them and their ability to manage recreational programming out of them for those parks. I think, there's very impressive things that are done and with very limited buildings already in Oakland, but I think this would give a big benefit to those kinds of activities. Thinking about Fraser Fieldhouse, for example, and how much can happen out of that pretty limited structure. So in terms of locations, one of the locations that came up very early on was the idea of looking at Fraser Fieldhouse and the services that already happen out of there and how the building could be improved or replaced. And then interact with Dan Moreno Field in South Oakland. One of the things that the Oak Cliff folks sort of highlighted for us is that the Community Urban Services building was originally conceived of as this kind of center or this kind of resource to the neighborhood and could probably use some reinvestment and reactivation. In working with the residents in West Oakland, we've been talking about the corner and how there's pretty advanced plans for what the corner can be. And how that could serve this kind of function for West Oakland. We've been talking with OPDC about their Career Service Center and how these kinds of things are totally consistent with where they're headed. If there's the redevelopment around Zulema Park, that could be a great opportunity for Zulema Park to have something on the edge of it that provides this kind of function. It may be too much to have, it's better to have more options on the table than fewer, but whether we need that if we had the one at OPDC is something we'd have to figure out at the time. But right now we want to sort of keep both options on the table. And then one that was really brought to us by North Oakland residents was the Herron Hill Pumping Station Annex. So the Herron Hill Pumping Station was just recently listed as a historic resource, and it has an annex behind it, which is really sort of a beautiful building that's basically just storage. And this is city property that we have an agreement with the Water and Sewer Authority for the pumping station itself. So we're sort of looking at that. That came up very early on, and we've sort of looked at a little bit already as a potential place for providing these sort of community services. And that one, I know people were looking at like a healthy, active living center really early on. I think that's the last slide on community service hubs. So I'm going to stop for a sec and let people ask questions.
We had one question earlier about whether or not the Morningside Center as conceived is actually going to happen, or if there's something.
Yeah, I can get an update for you on the Morningside Center, just to sort of provide a little bit more updated information on that one. I don't know it myself.
I know there's a number of people on the call from South Oakland who had interest specifically in uses for Fraser Field and so forth. If you guys have questions at this time or suggestions, input.
I'll just, double thumbs up, amplifying Fraser Fieldhouse. It's such a great piece of land, and they do, there's so much interesting programming going on out of it, but it could really be doing more for the community.
I think, more with more support. It's beyond capacity at the moment, and it's mostly at the grace of volunteer activity that there is programming there at this time. So, some programmatic as well as architectural support for offering better and more extensive services to the community. Anybody want to weigh in?
Yeah, I would second that.
Hey, Ty.
And just, hey, my name is Ty.
Okay.
Yeah, we have, a wealth of programming and wants, of different services. We are currently reaching the capacity for what we're able to do with that space. So definitely with more support, we would definitely be interested in seeing what the potential of that space could look like.
Excellent. Hi, Ty.
Hey.
So I think we just have some concurrence in the chat if there's anybody has any other additional questions or ideas. Andrea is noting that the water feature could use some updating.
Agreed. Yeah. I thought
Hey, there's water,
that.
it's a feature. What do you need? Get a bunch of 5-year-olds.
Yeah, they don't have the highest expectations for water features, but
No.
the adults look at it and think, could be a little bit better. Yeah.
Oh, it's been pretty mildewy the past couple summers.
Yeah.
Not as much love, definitely.
Yeah.
But there's been some maintenance issues across the board for the city during COVID especially, but yeah. Anyway, okay.
Okay.
You want to, oh, sorry, I'm hearing one more here. Potential for a gravel track around the field for walking. So perhaps if Fraser Field was to be, developed in this way as a community hub, that there could be some attention paid also to the function of the larger field or park around it.
Yeah, it's definitely I second that. I'm not sure what the structure is around it now, but it's really not, conducive for walking around. We've had some injuries from some folks over there. Well.
Okay.
What about a bocce court? I remember we had a comment on the Engage page about adding bocce. Any thumbs up, thumbs down to bocce?
Would bocce displace the use of the fields as a baseball field?
I don't think that they were. I don't think they were recommending that anything should be displaced. It was like a yes and sort of, because they were hoping that we could improve the basketball courts too. But yeah, I mean, the next stages would have to be sort of designing up the space and figuring it. There's sort of a space planning component of this, and then also sort of just a site planning component of this. Is how do you try to meet all the different needs on limited land? So yeah.
Yeah, Derek, speaking a little bit on the basketball court, these ideas are really coming from Mara, from walking with her around the space. Just sort of expanding what that court could be, because it sounds like there's that space is heavily used by university students.
Right.
So then it makes it difficult for youth to use the court in any capacity, because it's sort of like if you're not on the court, then you're on the field, despite having a lot of space next to the court itself, potentially for bocce, potentially for another hoop, maybe even another court.
Right.
Yeah, those kinds of amenities do kind of dictate how you can, in fact, actually use the space. So the field itself, the baseball field, seems to be more of a city amenity than it is a community amenity in terms of who gets to use it. And of course, that's valid. There aren't that many baseball diamonds that are available in the city, and so the leagues do use the ones that they can find. But yeah, the more immediate pressing need is what to do for kids after school hanging out. And those kids are younger or older, but could use some access to the basketball courts. And we've heard that in West Oakland as well. Sorry, Amara, you have your hand raised. You want to unmute yourself?
Yes, hello. Hi, everyone. That park, I grew up in Oakland. I went to homeschool,
Me too.
and that park has been there looking the same since I was in grade school. So it's a wonderful space. It has so much potential. We have a wonderful space here. The field house, the park, like everything. And it could be, you know, re-innovated into something wonderful and a point of interest for our community and our youth and our senior citizens. There's a lot of like empty space, like the basketball courts. We can definitely use another basketball court, because I know for a fact when I'm over there with the kids that the Pitt students come, or any students come, and the younger kids can't play because there's only one court. And there is space to expand on that. The water spout has been there since I was a baby, and it just continuously goes. It doesn't stop. There's no sensor on it. To turn that into a spray park, or to turn that into something, you know, a little bit more kid friendly would be wonderful. To update the field house, you know, to update the garden. Like, we have a great space. We just need the support to make it happen.
Mhm.
I just want to clarify, in case anybody's not aware, that the garden, the Fraser Farms next door, is actually on OPDC owned property, and it's maintained by volunteers in the neighborhood there, but it's dedicated for the purpose of a community garden, but it's not a city asset, for what it's worth.
All right. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's a special place. And I think that sort of came through in the planning process too. It was really sort of a focal point for people. And it got a lot of people excited. And I think it has, you know, there's a lot of people who are excited at the city too, particularly the Department of Public Works. So I'm excited about where that heads.
Maybe, Derek, I know that you can't necessarily get into it really deeply, but some sort of allusion to, you know, where the investment would come from to build that out, if in fact that was deemed necessary, and like what kind of a process would be involved in making that plan.
Yeah, it could be. So we do a lot of parks master planning at city planning, actually. So we collaborate with Department of Public Works, which would ultimately do the investments in the park. We do that earlier stage master planning, and it could be that. It could be, you know, we're extraordinarily good at getting grants for parks master plans, so we usually get a grant for those, and then you know, those are not terribly long processes, but it is a great place for us to sort of just focus in on the park itself with the community and understand the sort of specifics. And usually we get sort of a conceptual site plan out of that, and costing, and a lot of things that then are sort of queued up perfectly so that the Department of Public Works can then make a capital budget request. And then there's also funding that they can seek, grants that they can seek to match their funds. And so that would be sort of the traditional way for us to do that, is you know, a sort of a shorter master planning process that then leads to a design build process. I don't want to move on. I can see just from the chat icon that there's 21 comments in there, but I don't want to make sure we're not missing anything. That
some of it is a conversation that's happening among people on the chat about density and so forth. But
Okay.
There are a couple here that are useful. So Randy, I'm going to let you go ahead and read your comment, but just I want to highlight Dave asked a question, which is how can people provide additional input on the Dan Moreno field? And I see from the Engage page, Derek, that the comments are disabled at the moment for the different action teams, and I'm just kind of curious if there is in fact actually any good way for people to submit comments at this time outside of this meeting, of course, and future meetings like it.
Yeah, I think so. When the draft plan, there's probably, I'll answer, we'll always take the comment, but the most straightforward time to receive it is when we release the draft plan, which we're intending to do at the end of this month, at the beginning of next month. And so when we release that plan, it will all be released on Engage, and every every strategy that has a summary will have a separate comment form for that. We're actually working on putting a board out at these specific locations. So like at the park in this case, that would then have like a little QR code. And so when you're at the park, you can, you know, pull up your phone and actually go and drop a comment on that specific proposal while you're at the park even. So that will be the easiest way to do it. We will take comments by email right now. People are commenting constantly, so that's good, right? So if you have the ideas now and you want to send them to us now, we can think about incorporating them into the draft plan that's released. But you know, if you want to collect your thoughts, and you know, in a couple of weeks we'll have a draft plan, and there'll be an easy way for you to post your comments and even to engage with other people's comments too, because the way our engaged platform works is you can see everyone's comments and then you can respond to them and like them, or reply to them if you want at that point too.
And then Randy, do you want to unmute and just say your comment?
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to make the point. So I live close to the park, and just observing kind of how the usage of the park. I think that, you know, Mira and several people said that expanding the basketball would be fantastic. The basketball courts are used all the time, and I think you're right. I think that if we had more basketball court, that would be fine. You know, Mike mentions it's a place of gathering. You know, the water area next to the playground, you know, you could expand that and make it into a much nicer one, kind of like we see in some of the other neighborhoods. But the point I was trying to make is that if we're trying to expand the basketball court, or if we're trying to expand the water area or the field house, and if it were to shrink the softball field a little bit, I think that would be okay from the residents, because we as residents are mostly not the ones using the softball field. It's used infrequently and by people outside the neighborhood, maybe outside the city, I'm not sure. And it's a big pile of cars when when it's used, for sure. But in terms of priorities, I would love to hear other people chime in on this, but that's what I observe.
I observed that too, and that's one of the reasons I asked in the chat about the baseball field in central Oakland across the street from the plaza. We have, so I rarely see people in that one too. I mean, that's just anecdote. That's not actually, I don't know how much it's actually used, but it seems a little interesting for a single neighborhood to have two baseball diamonds. Are we aware who owns that? Is that, Andrea, you probably know the history much better than I would.
It is owned by the city. It is part of the city's park network. That's back there, right behind the wall fragment that's left over from Forbes Field. And my understanding is that there is a shortage of baseball diamonds in the city, and that leagues kind of struggle to be able to locate their games. But it used to be the case that there was actually an Oakland Little League team, and that does not appear to be the case anymore. So, you know, one hesitates to get rid of an amenity that, you know, potentially if we were able to increase the number of families with children who live here, that there might be that demand again. But I totally hear what you're saying. I'm not, there's no evaluation of any kind in that to be able to say, but I, as an Oakland resident, I would concur with you that there are maybe better, slightly more, you know, as Randy was saying, with the parking, less intensive places where you could have that amenity located in Oakland.
Yeah, the city has a shortage of a number of playing field types. Soccer fields are another one that the city has a shortage of. And I know other neighborhoods have had to have conversations about where their facilities, you know, where, like, quote unquote, their facilities stand in terms of what they're offering to like the immediate neighborhood versus the citywide matrix of fields. Right. So that, you know, as Derek, I believe, pointed out earlier, would definitely need to be a broader conversation with DPW.
There's also a comment in here from Kathy Gallagher about, is there the potential to use the green space surrounding the Herron Hill pumping station while plans are developed for the building? for example, an AARP grant for outdoor senior activity if we have access to public space.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Make sure I capture that. So the idea is sort of an interim use of the grounds while we're working on the building side of it. Okay, because yeah,
Right.
people may not be as familiar with that, but it is worth checking out because there's quite a lot of land around that and a lot of trees, and in some cases people have sort of created little spaces around there for some of the residents in the buildings adjacent to it, but it is a lot of space actually in a pretty tight urban constrained area.
And I just want to reassure everybody, we're going to grab all of these comments that are in the chat here, and we will forward them along to Derek to make sure that all of it does get captured. And these comments will be included in the transcript, or not the transcript, but the notes that we post about this meeting on our website. There are some questions here about whether or not Pitt ever makes their soccer or baseball fields available to others. And then there's some questions about lighting around Dan Marino. So I know that lighting is the lighting is a maintenance question and is for DPW, not for DCP. In this particular case, we can take that up as we go. But then a question about the Pitt's amenities available to the neighborhood. Is that something that figures into conversations about these kinds of assets in the future?
That's a good question. We haven't really thought about sort of Pitt's amenities as sort of a part of the broader set of recreational opportunities. But I think it's a good comment. I don't have the answer on that one in particular, but
Derek, I can offer just,
hey Jamie.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
So
Good to see you.
good to see you. So yes, the university does make our facilities available to the community. There's obviously a bit of a process, right, to be able to get access to things like our fields and our sort of general sports facilities. But we have sort of partnered with nonprofit organizations, Pittsburgh Flag Football League, some other leagues to be able to get them sort of ongoing access. With the pandemic, that complicates things a little bit, but I would say broadly we're open to the conversation and seeing what we can make happen in a way that doesn't push out the sort of students that are paying for recreation spaces, looking definitely to advance greater facility use, including our fields.
Thanks, Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
I just have a few more slides, and we are getting perfectly into the territory that I thought we'd be in, which is you're just going to get to see some images that maybe you haven't seen before as a teaser for next month. So there are no shortage of transportation projects, mobility projects in the plan, and we think we've got some of these are very long discussions and long desired things. So, and we've got some proposals that are sort of an initial proposal, but we want to have it in the plan as sort of a starting point for a project. So, just a snapshot, Robinson Street in West Oakland has been a major problem for the neighborhood, the traffic. And so both the speed of the traffic, the amount of the traffic, and then particularly when there's events. And so looking at how do you start to calm that traffic, and are there ways to do so that actually start to meet some of the other needs we heard about, which are stormwater issues, issues around the fact that that corridor has almost no trees on it. And so can we create more tree canopy, a more comfortable environment for pedestrians? So you're going to see things like that. We're trying to sort of create multiple benefits with these projects. Boulevard of the Allies is a major conversation in the planning process, certainly. And so one of the things that we have in there is sort of a detailed proposal for adding a two-way cycle track on a portion of the Boulevard of the Allies. This is the portion the city owns between the Anderson Bridge and Bates. And that comes along with a number of signal improvements or new signals that would make it easier to cross the boulevard. So generally what we heard is the boulevard is, basically separates the neighborhood and is extremely difficult and unsafe to cross. People would like it to be a place that you came to, that were both street improvements made it easier to cross and to be there, but also that there's development activity along there that was more mixed use. If you go back to the Oakland 2025 plan, you see that there too, right? The idea that the boulevard could have a different kind of character to it. So these are transportation projects that start to implement that. And then one of the streets we've been looking at is McKee Place, and the idea of putting a cycle track on that, which is part of the, for folks that were involved in the Bike Plus plan, you'll see that as the line in the Bike Plus plan as well. So there's adding some more detail to that and thinking about how do you actually accommodate that, and how do you deal with the many intersections along that rather long street between Bates and Forbes. So you can see some of those snapshots here. And you'll have a chance to talk with the transportation planners and dig into all the details of these next month. And then you'll see there's lots of these sort of big maps. And so you're saying sort of, 10 years worth of projects. So this is a 10-year plan, and there's 10 years worth of projects in here. And so these are maps that are sort of proposal versions of things you've seen in the past in the planning process, but it's starting to look at, in this case, where are those pedestrian safety improvements being prioritized? Where did we hear about them, and where are we proposing them in different formats? So you can see corridor improvements, intersection improvements, steps, things like that. And then on the other map here, you can see improvements to bus shelters. So again, this is a teaser. I'm not necessarily the right person to answer all the questions, but we wanted to sort of let you know that there is sort of another opportunity to talk about this at the next Let's Talk meeting. And I'm sure it's, this is very important stuff, and it was a major topic of conversation throughout the planning process. So I'm sure that people feel very passionately about this chapter of the plan in particular. I think everyone knows this stuff, but we often don't even show this slide, but we do have all of our materials online, sometimes overwhelmingly so. I know we've heard that comment that if you wanted to, you could go back and find the first comment that we received on Engage. And that's absolutely true. You could see every comment that we received on there. Even when we got comments at in-person events, you'll see that staff then went and logged all those into Engage. So it is pretty comprehensive. And then if that weren't enough, we still have the city page where you have every steering committee presentation throughout the entire planning process, the existing conditions reports and presentations from even before the planning process started, when we did the planning education series and the urban design workshop in 2019. So nothing's gone really. The internet keeps everything alive for us. So you can find almost anything that we've created over the 2.5+ years. So if you're looking for something, it's probably there. If you need help finding it, that's what I'm here for. But there's a lot on there.
So thanks, Derek. I really do want to encourage people, if you want to even stop sharing, we can see people's faces. If there's anybody has any questions or things that we didn't make up.
Hello.
Hello. Someone just unmuted themselves on the call. Did you have a comment that you wanted to do? You can unmute again. There you are.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I just want to get the person's name who was talking first. The first gentleman who was just talking about the Herron Hill pumping station.
Yes, that's Derek Dauphin, who's the city planner.
Oh, okay, Derek. How you spell his last name?
Sure, Dauphin.
And how can when are they going to start working on that? Because he said something about making something, the Herron Hill pumping station for seniors or something, use some of that space.
Yeah, hi, this is Derek. I'm still here actually. So yeah, what we're looking at.
When you said, I'm sorry, when you said some people don't know about the Herron Hill, I know that building, they used to have the name on top of the building, Herron Hill, but I think they etched it out.
I don't know whether that's the case.
Okay. So I'm familiar with that area. Go ahead, you can talk.
Yeah. So the intent is to, these are just proposals in a plan right now, and it's a draft plan, so it's not an approved plan yet. So we want to release the plan at the end of this month, or beginning of next month, and then we have a public process to review the plan, and then it would be adopted by the Planning Commission. And so once the plan is adopted, then the city would begin work on implementing the plan. And so there's lots of projects and programs in there. So we're really going to be looking at prioritizing those projects in the plan itself, and then picking up those from that set of priorities.
How long do you think this planning would take? How long do you think?
To have the plan adopted is not very long. So we're planning on like a 45-day public comment period once the plan is released, and then going to Planning Commission and having it adopted there after having public hearings. And that's sort of the plan itself. And then the nice thing about that, the way that this has worked out, is that does lead us actually right into the budgeting process for the city. So we're looking at sort of starting to think about what projects we would seek budget, city budget for in the next year's budget, because that's about the same time the plan would be adopted. Okay, well, I'll just keep in touch with you about this, because I'm interested in that project. Excellent. Yeah. And there's been a fair amount of interest. I think that one has had a lot of interest, and even the councilperson Strasburger has been looking at that already too. So is there a number that I can reach you? Well, we're not in the office right now, so numbers probably aren't the best, but I'll share my email address. Well, actually, and Andrea may have already shared it, but you can certainly email me right now is probably the best way to get a hold of me. I can tell it to you now if that would be helpful. I'm ready. Okay. So it's just my name. So it's DEREK. DEREK. Dot DAU. P as in Paul, H as in Henry, IN. And then it's at pittsburghpa.gov. pittsburghpa.gov. Yep. Pittsburghpa.gov. Okay. Do you spell Pittsburgh out, or just PGHPA? We spell it out. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dauphin. All right. Thank you. All right.
Does anyone else have any questions? There are a couple other people who might be on the phone.
Andrea?
Yeah.
This is Kathy Gallagher. Could I just, I think the previous woman was referring probably to my comment about more immediate use of the green space at the pumping station. And we've been contacted by several organizations willing to provide small grants for outdoor activities for seniors. And so I think she was referring probably to the possibility of that coming sooner rather than later.
I see.
So I don't know if that's your department or who we would contact to see if we could have access to that green space during the time that the planning is going on.
Why don't you, if you could send me an email, I can get the ball rolling with the, what we've learned already is that it's complicated because there's the Water and Sewer Authority on there and also Department of Public Works, but we can, and I definitely will want to have Councilperson Strasburger involved as well, because she sort of knows the history of it. But yeah, please do send that to me and we can try to get that going sooner than later, because I think that's
I will send you the information. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy.
There's a lot of conversation in the chat here, and I'm kind of scrolling through it here, trying to find if there are specific questions related to what it is that Derek has presented. If I have not voiced a question and you feel like you need an answer, could anybody who has participated in that chat or has other questions, now would be a great time.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Mike Yursik. How are you today?
We're good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I had a couple questions for Derek, and Derek, first of all, I'm a builder, so I appreciate the time you've spent with us, and it certainly opened my eyes quite a bit to the amount of work that went into the Oakland Plan. And I had a couple of questions, one of which got answered, and that was the timing. One of the folks talked about, you talked about the draft and then 45 days, and then it would be adopted after that. So that kind of puts a timing on it, which was important to me. The next thing, we talked about Oakland 2025. And I, of course, I'm a recent owner in Oakland, so I'm a little late to the party. I was not involved in any of the previous meetings, but I'm sure that you're going to see me more active going forward. I see that there's like 39 people, somewhere around there, participants. It's down to 33 now. When you talked about all the programs and the reaching out to the community, is that a typical number, Derek, for these meetings, or is it go to the hundreds sometime, or is it typically hover? I'm trying to figure out, when you talk about input, how much input it really is, or how much is it the same 30 people? I mean, have you talked to the same 30 people for 2.5 years, or has there been 100 people or 200 people in a meeting?
So this slide that I showed at the beginning gets at the numbers.
Okay.
So we definitely have had meetings with 100 people on it. We've had meetings with 30 people on it. We've had meetings with less than 30 people.
Okay.
It's, you know, I do want to caution people that public engagement is not about numbers. So in the public engagement profession, they don't like these kinds of slides because it's not about the numbers, but there are some pretty big numbers on this slide. So I don't want people to misconstrue that this is the same 33 people that we've been hearing from the entire planning process, because I think that it's not accurate, and it may be intentional misleading of what's going on here.
So the next question, when I talk about 2025, and I've been involved in a few of these in my own community, obviously in a much smaller scale, but if you pulled out the 2025 plan, how much of that came true, or was it something that people put effort into and it was kind of put on a shelf? Or, I mean, if you did 20% of that bear fruit, I'm just trying to get a feel for the plan, and you've made it clear how it's going to get approved, but the implementing of it, was 2025 pursued with vigor, or was it something that was done? And I know you weren't here for that, but as Derek, as you look at the new plan, Oakland Plan, I'm sure you used the old plan as a basis. Is it the same stuff regurgitated, or is it new, fresh ideas? And did they knock some things off the list of the old plan as things that were completed?
Maybe I can weigh in on that just a
Sure.
second here to say that Oakland 2025 was the last master plan that was produced for the entire neighborhood of Oakland. And it was published in 2011. It had over a year's worth of public engagement meetings and open houses, workshops, and it produced a large number of different kinds of recommendations. Some of the renderings that Derek is showing you there are snapshots from the plan. You can find the entirety of the Oakland 2025 plan on OPDC's website, as well as among the resources that is listed in the Engage page, and we'll drop the links to that in the chat in just a second. So that was the thing that was the most recent plan, and then but it was not produced by the city, and it was never formally adopted by the city. So the plan that Derek is talking about right now is formally undertaken by the Department of City Planning. That is the lead agency that is coordinating this, and it has a different approval process. So maybe Derek, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. And maybe that, I don't know if that part wasn't clear. So when I talked about the fact that there's 5 or 6 different departments in this, and that I'm not the expert, so it's a kind of a different undertaking, and having these city departments on the project team is intentional, right? These are the departments that would implement the strategies in the plan. We just didn't have that kind of infrastructure when the Oakland 2025 plan was done. I don't think that's to say the city wasn't involved, that we didn't have sort of an active neighborhood planning program at that time. I don't think. So
go ahead.
Yeah. So there is sort of a difference in the two plans. I also don't want to detract from that plan and say that there weren't things that weren't learned and incorporated in this plan. But I hope that if you go and actually read these documents, you'd see some of the new things and some of the continuity there. It seems very easy to sort of ask these kind of questions, but I hope that you'd go and do some reading yourself and learning and listening yourself. And I think that would help a lot of things, because that plan has existed for 10 years and there's a lot of content that we've got online right now. So if you go take a look at those things, I think you'll see there's a lot of new fresh ideas in there.
I certainly will. And I got one last question, and I appreciate, I've been in on the meeting with the mayor, and this is the first chance I've had to talk. So the last question that I have, we all know that this Walnut Capital has something on the table that they're pushing very hard on. And a question that I had, once again, as a builder, there was a lot of comments about waiting on the Oakland Plan. So my question is, you're 45 days out, and the mayor pushed it out 30 days, and I don't have a calendar with any of this laid out, but does somebody who's proposing something like Walnut Capital, are they obligated to wait for the Oakland Plan to make it through its process? Or is that just something that people have expressed an opinion that they wished that they would wait on the Oakland Plan? Or are they compelled to wait on the Oakland Plan? Or what? How does that work? If they get to the front of the line before the Oakland Plan is done, is it something that everything that I am going to read, and I'm going to read extensively, Derek, I can assure you, is the cart in front of the horse if they make it to the table before the plan, or are they compelled to wait on the plan?
Yeah, I think that's actually a question from the mayor's office more than it is for me.
Okay.
And they do have an active engagement. I think that you can still go on and ask those kind of questions.
Right. Well, Derek, thank you so much for I know I ask a blistering bunch of questions, and I promise you I'll be up to speed for any additional meetings, and I appreciate all your hard work.
Sure, thank you.
And just to clarify what's currently on the table, I think that you're alluding to, Mr. Yurcik, is the proposed zoning change legislation, and that is due for the Planning Commission now to review it in March. And that isn't a development proposal, that is a set of changes to existing zoning law. So it contains in it uses and parameters and boundaries, heights, density, all those kinds of things, and lots of different potential, but no specific development plan.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. Great. We just wanted to be able to make sure that we had a chance at the end of this meeting here to have any community announcements. I know that there's a lot of people on the call that might have other news that they would like to be able to share. Particularly, oh, there we go. And sorry, toggle. There we go. So upcoming meetings I'd like to be able to make sure everybody knows about. This was what I was just mentioning, currently on the schedule for the Planning Commission to review the Oakland Public Realm Subdistrict E legislation. That's Tuesday, March 8th. And then on March 16th, just as Derek was teasing, we will have the second Let's Talk, which will be about mobility. In addition, I'm so sorry that it's not listed here, because that was me not realizing that this wasn't listed before, so sorry. That same evening, March 16th at 7 p.m., we have the Oak Watch meeting. And Liz, I believe you had something you wanted to say about that.
Yes, in March, Sarah Kintner, the Director of Permits, Licensing, and inspections. We'll be discussing the coming rental registration. And the second point will be working about, how the community can work to deal with dead end properties, which sadly Oakland has several of them. And they've just, PLI gets to a point they can't do anything about it because they don't have anybody to serve. So she'll be addressing that. I also wanted to say tomorrow night is the Zone 4 Public Safety meeting at 6:30 via Zoom. And the speaker is going to be Sergeant Tiffany Klein Costa. And she's of the Office of Community Engagement, and she's going to explain how, what, where, and why that is, which should be interesting. So if you can join us, the Zoom links for both those meetings are located on the OPDC event calendar. And that's me.
Anyone else? Announcements, questions?
Hi, I am Pauline with 222 Robinson. It's currently a vacant land, but the community had been using it as a garden. I have an architect to draw plans to build a house on that spot. Is this the forum to share the drawings and get feedback from the neighbors?
It's not, Pauline. This is actually just a community discussion meeting of a particular subject. So this is a place for announcements and community discussion, but it is not a development activities meeting. It's not a design development review meeting. So I think I already addressed your question in the chat, and I'm happy to follow up with you directly tomorrow. I promise.
Okay, so there's another forum that I would do that with?
Yes, if you have plans for everybody to review, then we will
absolutely.
time with you for a development activities meeting. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Sure, of course. Okay, well, if we don't have any additional questions, thanks so much, Derek. I really appreciate it. And we really appreciate all of you for coming out on this evening, even though you're attending from the comfort, hopefully, of a nice warm living room. And we hope to see you all next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.